I didn't know betrayal could be so quiet. It didn't crash into my life like thunder or explode in some dramatic argument. It crept in softly, wearing the face of exhaustion, hiding behind hospital bills, long shifts, and the kind of love that makes you put your own needs last without even realizing you've disappeared. The night everything truly began, I was sitting alone at our kitchen table, still in my work uniform, staring at a cold cup of tea. The clock on the microwave blinked 2:14 a.m. My feet throbbed, my back ached, and the house was silent in that heavy way that feels louder than noise. I remember thinking, if I fall asleep right here, no one would even notice. That was the first thought that scared me. Before his illness, before the hospital rooms and antiseptic smells, before my life turned into double shifts and quiet prayers, my marriage looked ordinary. Not perfect. Just steady. The kind of marriage built on routine more than romance, shared bills instead of shared poems. And for a long time, that was enough for me. My husband, Daniel, used to joke that I was the strong one. "You're the backbone of this family," he'd say, usually while sitting on the couch, feet up, watching the evening news. I'd roll my eyes and tell him someone had to be. I worked as a nursing assistant back then, long hours, sore muscles, the kind of job where people only notice you when something goes wrong. Still, I came home every evening, cooked dinner, folded laundry, listened to his stories about work. We had a rhythm. Then he got sick. It started with a cough he wouldn't take seriously. "It's nothing," he said, waving me off while I counted pills into a plastic organizer. By the time he collapsed in the bathroom one morning, it was already too late to pretend. The hospital lights were harsh, the beeping machines relentless. I remember gripping his hand while the doctor explained procedures and recovery timelines. Nodding like I understood, even though my ears were ringing. Recovery, they said, would take time. Months. Maybe longer. So I worked more. I picked up extra shifts. Overnight shifts. Weekend shifts. I smiled at my supervisor and said yes to everything because what choice did I have? Bills don't pause for illness. Rent doesn't soften because you're scared. I'd leave the house before sunrise and come back after dark, my clothes smelling faintly of disinfectant and exhaustion. Daniel stayed home. At first, I didn't resent it. I told myself this was what marriage meant, carrying each other when one of you couldn't walk on their own. I cooked softer foods. I learned which medications made him nauseous. I set alarms in the middle of the night to check his temperature. I rubbed his back when he couldn't sleep. He thanked me. Always gently. Always with tired eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he'd say, squeezing my hand. And I believed him. Our home changed during that time. The air always smelled faintly of medicine and reheated soup. The television stayed on all day, low volume, some daytime show murmuring in the background. I stopped noticing the small things about myself, the way my hair stayed tied back for weeks, the way I ate standing up, the way my laughter disappeared. I told myself it was temporary. The first thing that felt off was his phone. It wasn't dramatic. No secret calls in the middle of the night. No lipstick stains or sudden cologne. Just distance. He used to leave his phone on the coffee table, screen up, forgotten. Now it stayed face down. Or in his pocket. Or locked. When I teased him about it, he smiled too quickly. "Privacy, remember," he said. "I'm allowed that." I nodded, embarrassed for even asking. After all, I was the one barely home anymore. I was the one who kissed his forehead instead of his lips because I was too tired. I blamed myself before I blamed him. There were other things. Small things. He started showering later in the evening, right before I got home. He cared more about how he looked when I wasn't there than when I was. He began mentioning a friend who checked in on him sometimes, a woman from a local support group, he said. Someone who understood what recovery felt like. "She just listens," he told me once, when I asked too many questions. You're always working. I didn't want to bother you. That word, bother, stuck with me. I remember one morning clearly. I was lacing my shoes by the door, the sky still dark outside. Daniel was sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone, smiling at something on the screen. Not a big smile. Just warm. Familiar. The kind he used to give me when we first started dating. What's funny? I asked, forcing lightness into my voice. He looked up too fast, thumb locking the screen. Nothing, he said. Just a meme. I nodded and stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind me. The air was cold, sharp in my lungs. I sat in my car for a moment longer than usual, hands on the steering wheel, and felt something heavy settle in my chest. Still, I kept going. Because love, I thought, meant endurance. Because marriage, I thought, meant sacrifice. Because if I just worked harder, slept less, gave more, this season would pass. I didn't know then that while I was holding our life together with tired hands and quiet prayers, someone else was slipping into the space I had emptied. And I wouldn't see it clearly until the day I realized I was no longer just supporting his recovery. I was funding my own betrayal. There's a kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. It settles deep in your bones and makes even the smallest decisions feel heavy. That was the tiredness I carried into every shift, every meal, every quiet drive home. I learned how to function on autopilot, clock in, smile, lift patients, clean rooms, clock out. I stopped asking myself how I felt because I didn't have the energy to answer. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed to be improving. Physically, at least. He moved around the house more. His color came back. He started cooking simple meals again, though the kitchen always looked cleaner when I got home, like he wanted credit without saying it. He talked more about the support group, about people he'd met, about how recovery was as much mental as it was physical. I listened. I always listened. But something in his voice had changed. There was a lightness there I hadn't heard in a long time. A spark. And selfish as it sounds, it hurt to realize that spark wasn't meant for me. One evening, after a 16-hour shift, I came home to the smell of something sweet, vanilla and cinnamon. There was a pie cooling on the counter. Daniel stood by the sink, wiping his hands on a towel, looking almost proud. I tried a new recipe, he said. Thought you might like it. I smiled because that's what wives do. It smells good. But as I leaned in to kiss his cheek, I caught a different scent. Not vanilla. Not cinnamon. Perfume. Light. Floral. Soft. It startled me enough that I pulled back. Did someone visit today? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He hesitated. Just for a second. Yeah, he said. From the group. Clara. She was in the neighborhood. There it was. A name. Clara. He said it like I should already know her, like she'd been part of our lives longer than she had any right to be. I nodded slowly, my smile stiffening. That was nice of her. She worries about me, he added quickly. You know, because you're always working. That again. Always working. I wanted to say, I'm working for us. I wanted to say I'm tired too. But the words stayed trapped behind my teeth. I went to shower instead, letting the hot water run longer than necessary, watching steam fog up the mirror until I couldn't see myself anymore. That night, while Daniel slept beside me, I lay awake listening to the rhythm of his breathing. His phone buzzed once on the nightstand. Just once. He didn't move. I stared at the ceiling, counting cracks in the paint, telling myself it meant nothing. The next few weeks blurred together. My schedule grew heavier. A coworker quit, and I took her shifts too. My paychecks went straight into rent, utilities, groceries, medications. I didn't buy anything for myself, not even a new pair of shoes when mine started wearing thin at the soles. Daniel, meanwhile, started dressing better. Shaving more often. He complained less about pain. He laughed more at his phone than at anything I said. I began to notice how often he mentioned Clara. She said this medication worked better for her. Clara thinks I'm pushing myself too hard. Clara understands what it's like to feel useless. Each time, it felt like a small cut. Not deep enough to bleed. Just enough to sting. One afternoon, my supervisor called me into her office. She was kind but firm. "You're burning out," she said. "I can see it." I shrugged. "I'll be fine." She looked at me for a long moment. "Just make sure someone's taking care of you too." The irony nearly made me laugh. That night, I came home earlier than usual. No text. No warning. I just came home. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel's shoes were by the door, but his jacket was missing. The TV was off. His phone wasn't on the table where he usually left it when he showered. I stood in the living room, listening, my heart beginning to pound. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I went into the kitchen. On the counter sat 2 coffee mugs. One with a lipstick mark faintly smudged on the rim. I don't wear lipstick. My hands started to shake. I picked up the mug, staring at it like it might explain itself. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe a friend. Maybe nothing. But deep down, something inside me already knew. When Daniel came home an hour later, he froze when he saw me sitting at the table. The pie from days ago was gone. The mugs were washed and drying on the rack. I had lined them up carefully, like evidence. "You're home early," he said. "So are you," I replied. He swallowed. "I went for a walk." "With Clara." The name slipped out before I could stop it. His shoulders sagged, just slightly. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "I'm recovering. I need support. And I'm not supporting you." My voice cracked despite my efforts. "That's not what I meant." He rubbed his face, avoiding my eyes. "She just listens. You're never here." There it was again. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded slowly. "I see." But I didn't. Not yet. What I saw was exhaustion. What I felt was confusion. What I didn't realize was that while I was still trying to understand, still trying to fix what I thought was breaking, Daniel had already crossed a line he couldn't walk back from. And the proof was closer than I imagined. Waiting quietly. Like everything else, the truth has a way of revealing itself when you stop looking away. I didn't confront Daniel after that night. I didn't cry or demand explanations or go through his phone while he slept. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I paid attention. I started noticing patterns. The way he left the house around the same time on certain days. The way he suddenly needed fresh air after dinner. The way his phone buzzed and he'd tilt the screen away from me, his thumb moving too fast, like he was afraid I'd read something by accident. I listened more closely when he talked. I watched his face when he mentioned Clara's name, the way his mouth softened, the way his shoulders relaxed. I recognized that look because I'd worn it once, a long time ago, when I still felt seen. One morning, I stayed home sick. Just a cold, nothing serious, but my body finally refused to cooperate. I texted Daniel to let him know I wouldn't be at work. He replied with a quick okay. Rest. An hour later, I heard the front door close. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Then I got up, pulled on a sweater, and stepped outside. I didn't plan to follow him. Not really. But when I saw him get into his car instead of going for his usual walk, my feet moved before my mind could catch up. I got into my own car and kept a careful distance. He drove across town. Not to a park. Not to a clinic. to a small cafe near the river. I parked down the street and watched from behind my windshield. The air inside my car felt thick, like it was pressing in on me. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure someone could hear it. He walked in. 5 minutes later, a woman arrived. She was younger than me. Not by much but enough. She had long hair pulled back loosely, a light scarf around her neck. She smiled when she saw him. He stood to greet her, pulling her into a hug that lingered just a little too long. I didn't breathe. Through the cafe window, I watched them talk. Laugh. Lean toward each other. She reached across the table and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. I felt something inside me go very still. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't emotional support or innocent friendship. This was intimacy. Familiarity. Choice. I drove home in a fog. I don't remember the traffic lights, or the radio, or even pulling into the driveway. I sat in the car for a long time after, hands limp in my lap, staring at the house I had paid for, cleaned, and held together. When Daniel came home later that afternoon, I didn't say a word. I cooked dinner like usual. I asked about his walk. He lied without hesitation. That night, while he slept, I cried quietly into my pillow. Not loud, messy sobs. Just tears slipping down my temples, soaking into fabric that smelled like him. I grieved the marriage I thought I had, the loyalty I assumed was mutual. The next day, I asked for a half shift. Then another. Then another. I used that time to think. I thought about how much I had given. About the bills I'd paid. About the recovery appointments I'd scheduled, the medications I'd picked up, the nights I'd spent awake listening to his breathing. About how I'd been disappearing, while he'd been rediscovering himself in someone else's attention. Anger came later. First came clarity. I didn't want to scream or throw things or confront him in a moment of emotion he could twist into guilt or excuses. I wanted him to understand what he had done, not through my words but through absence. So I planned quietly. I started by separating my finances. I opened a new account at a different bank and redirected my paycheck. I paid one last month of rent in advance and left the rest untouched. I gathered my important documents, birth certificate, insurance papers, work records, and tucked them into a folder at the bottom of my work bag. Daniel noticed my calm. "You seem lighter," he said one evening, watching me fold laundry. I smiled faintly. "I am." He nodded, relieved. Mistaking my silence for forgiveness. A week later, he didn't come home at all. No text. No call. I didn't chase him. I slept alone in our bed for the first time in years, stretched out on my side, the quiet wrapping around me like a blanket. It was the best sleep I'd had in months. In the morning, I found the confirmation I didn't even need any more. His phone sat on the counter. He'd left it behind in his rush. I stared at it for a long moment, then picked it up. The screen lit easily. No password. There were messages. Dozens. Hundreds. "I miss you. She doesn't have to know. Once I'm fully better, things will change." Pictures too. Smiles I hadn't seen in years. Private jokes. Promises. I set the phone back down gently, like it might shatter. When Daniel finally came home that afternoon, he found the house empty. No clothes in the closet. No photos on the walls. No notes. Just a single envelope on the kitchen table, addressed to him in my handwriting. Inside was a copy of the lease termination notice, my half of the utility payments, and a short letter. "I paid for your recovery. You paid me back with betrayal. I won't be here to support what you chose." That was all. I didn't wait to see his reaction. I didn't need to. Because the hardest part was already over. I had chosen myself, leaving didn't feel dramatic. There was no shouting match, no slammed doors, no final look back over my shoulder. I carried my bags down the stairs of that apartment building in the early morning, the air cool and damp, the city still half asleep. My muscles ached from work and from the weight of everything I'd been holding in for months, but my hands were steady. I moved into a small studio across town. It wasn't much, one room, a narrow kitchen, a bathroom where the fan rattled like it might give up any day, but it was quiet. Clean. Mine. The first night there, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. I ate takeout straight from the container, and let myself feel everything I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not just sadness. Relief. Pride. Grief. Anger that arrived late but burned slow and steady. Daniel called the next morning. I let it ring. Then again. And again. By the fourth call, I picked up, not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to hear what accountability sounded like in his voice. "Where are you?" he asked, panic sharp and raw. "I'm safe," I said. "That's all you need to know." "You can't just leave," he said. "After everything we've been through." I closed my eyes. "That's exactly why I left." There was a pause. Then his voice dropped, softer. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "It always does," I replied. "Just not to the person who thinks they're in control." He started crying then. Real crying. I recognized the sound, the same helplessness I'd heard in hospital rooms, the same fear of being alone. Once that sound would have undone me. This time, it didn't. "I gave you everything I had," I said quietly. "And you gave your comfort to someone else. I won't compete with that." "I was lonely," he whispered. "So was I said. "I just stayed faithful." I hung up before he could respond. The fallout came slowly, like ripples spreading across water. His sister called first, her voice tight with disbelief. "Daniel says you abandoned him," she said. I took a breath. "Daniel knows where I am," I replied. "He also knows why I left." Word traveled the way it always does, crooked, incomplete, shaped by whoever speaks first. Some people looked at me with pity. Others with quiet admiration. A few with judgment I didn't bother correcting. Daniel's recovery stalled. Without my income, the bills piled up fast. He missed appointments. Lost access to certain treatments. The support group stopped being enough when it turned into something real, and complicated and unsustainable. Clara, it turned out, didn't want responsibility, just the version of him that needed her attention, not her help. When she left, he reached out again. "I messed up," he said over voicemail, his voice smaller than I remembered. I didn't realize what I had. I deleted the message. At work, something shifted in me. I stopped volunteering for every extra shift. I took my breaks. I laughed again, really laughed, once, over burnt coffee and a coworker's bad joke. My body still hurt, but it felt like my body again, not a machine running on obligation. One evening, months later, I ran into Daniel at the grocery store. He looked thinner. Tired in a way that wasn't just physical. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "You look well," he said finally. "I am," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I should have taken better care of you." "Yes," I said. "You should have." I walked away before nostalgia could soften the truth. Healing didn't happen all at once. Some nights, I still woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there. Some days, the anger resurfaced without warning. But slowly, I learned how to sit with myself. How to rest without guilt. How to believe that love should never require erasing yourself to survive. I began saving again, not just money but time. Energy. Pieces of myself I'd given away too easily. And in that quiet rebuilding, I found something stronger than revenge. I found peace. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small, almost unnoticeable moments. In the way you wake up without dread sitting heavy on your chest. In the way your shoulders relax without you telling them to. In the way silence stops feeling like abandonment and starts feeling like rest. After I left Daniel, I had to relearn who I was when I wasn't needed by someone else. For years, my identity had been stitched together by responsibility. Wife. Caregiver. Provider. The strong one. Without those labels pressing into my skin, I felt strangely weightless, like I might drift away if I didn't anchor myself to something new. So I started small. I bought a plant for my apartment, even though I'd never kept one alive before. I placed it by the window and watered it carefully, checking the soil with my finger like I was learning a new language. Watching something grow under my care, without draining me, felt like a quiet miracle. Sometimes, guilt crept in. It whispered that I should check on Daniel. That I'd left him vulnerable. That loyalty should have stretched further than betrayal. Those thoughts usually came late at night, when the world felt too still and memory had room to wander. But then I'd remind myself of the truth. I hadn't left him in his illness. I left him in his choices. That distinction mattered. Months passed. My lease turned into a home. The walls filled slowly, nothing extravagant, just framed photos of places I'd walked alone, shelves holding books I'd meant to read for years but never had the energy for. I took a weekend off for the first time in longer than I could remember and didn't apologize for it. One afternoon, my supervisor stopped me in the hallway. "You're different," she said, smiling. In a good way. I thought about that all the way home. Different didn't mean hardened. It didn't mean bitter. It meant awake. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Daniel had moved back in with his sister. That his health had stabilized again, though the spark he once talked about was gone. Clara was a closed chapter. Apparently she'd found someone else who could give her attention without expecting anything in return. I didn't feel satisfaction at that news. Just clarity. I understood then that consequences don't always arrive as punishment. Sometimes they arrive as truth, unwrapped and unavoidable. One evening, as I sat on my small balcony watching the sun dip behind the buildings, I realized I was smiling for no reason at all. No audience. No effort. Just a soft, genuine smile. That was when I knew I had healed more than I'd given myself credit for. I began dating again slowly, cautiously. Not because I needed someone, but because I wanted to share space, not fill it. I paid attention to how I felt around people, whether I felt expanded or diminished, energized or drained. The first time someone asked about my past, I didn't flinch. I didn't overshare or downplay. I simply said, I loved someone deeply, and I learned to love myself deeper. And that felt like the truest thing I'd ever said. Looking back now, I don't regret the years I spent supporting Daniel. Compassion is never a mistake. Love, freely given, is never something to be ashamed of. But I've learned this. Love should not cost you your dignity. Loyalty should not demand your silence. And sacrifice should never be one-sided. If you're listening to my story and you're tired, bone-tired, soul-tired, please hear this part clearly. You are allowed to stop pouring from an empty cup. You are allowed to choose yourself without asking permission. And walking away from betrayal is not abandonment. It is self-respect. There's a moment after betrayal when the anger fades, and what's left is something quieter and heavier. For me, it came one ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished grocery shopping, balancing 2 paper bags against my hip, when I saw Daniel's name pop up on my phone again. I hadn't blocked him. Not out of hope. Just neutrality. I wanted nothing left unresolved inside me. This time, I answered. "I'm not calling to beg," he said quickly, as if rehearsed. His voice sounded older. Not weaker, just worn down by the weight of his own decisions. "I just wanted you to know. I understand now." I leaned against my car, the metal still warm from the sun. Understand what? How much you carried, he said. How much I took. I closed my eyes. He told me about the bills. The ones he hadn't known how to manage because he'd never had to. The appointments he'd missed because no one reminded him. The long afternoons sitting alone, realizing that the silence he once escaped into was now permanent. I thought love was just being there, he said. I didn't realize how much work you were doing behind the scenes. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't need to. And when you left, he continued, everything fell apart. Not because you abandoned me, but because I never learned how to stand on my own. There was no accusation in his voice. Just truth. I hope you're okay, he said finally. I am, I replied. And this time, it didn't feel like something I had to convince myself of. After that call, something loosened inside me. Not forgiveness, at least not the kind people expect. But release. I no longer carried the need for him to understand. He already did. Too late, yes. But fully. That night, I slept deeply. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice how often women like me move through the world unnoticed. The caregivers. The steady ones. The women who hold everything together so quietly that no one realizes what would collapse without them. At work, I started speaking up more. Saying no when I meant no. Asking for help when I needed it. The younger nurses watched me closely, and one of them pulled me aside one day and said, I hope I'm as strong as you when I'm your age. I smiled gently. Strength isn't staying until it breaks you, I said. It's knowing when to leave. I meant it, time has a way of softening sharp edges. Not by erasing the past but by giving it context. A year after I left, I stood in front of the mirror on my birthday, adjusting a simple necklace around my neck. No grand celebration. Just dinner with a friend. But as I looked at my reflection, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Peace. Not the fragile kind. The earned kind. I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed late at night. I no longer replayed old conversations, wondering what I could have done differently. I understood now that betrayal doesn't happen because someone wasn't enough, it happens because someone else chose selfishness over integrity. Daniel was a chapter in my life. A meaningful one. But no longer the whole story. I heard later that he'd started volunteering at a recovery center. Helping others navigate the illness that once defined him. I hoped quietly that it was real growth, not guilt disguised as purpose. Either way, it was no longer my concern. What mattered was this: I had reclaimed my life without bitterness. Without cruelty. Without losing myself in revenge. My revenge, if you could call it that, was living well. Some evenings I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. And I'd think about the woman I used to be. The one who stayed silent. The one who believed love meant endurance without limits. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to leave. You don't need permission to save yourself. But maybe telling you is enough. If you've stayed with me this long, I want to ask you something, softly, honestly. How many times have you put yourself last for someone who wouldn't do the same for you? How many nights have you worked, waited, worried, believing love meant holding on tighter, even as you disappeared? I'm not here to tell you what choice to make. Every life is different. Every story carries its own weight. But I will tell you this. Love should not make you smaller. Loyalty should not require your silence. And sacrifice should never be invisible. Sometimes, the bravest thing a woman can do is walk away quietly, with dignity, clarity, and her self-respect intact. If my story touched you, or reminded you of a moment in your own life, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Would you have stayed longer, or would you have left sooner? And if you know someone who needs to hear this tonight, please share it with them. Until next time, take care of yourself. Because you matter too. Yellow Heart.